So I guess we could get started. For everyone joining us, this is the ICA Plays On Clarinet Care, Repair, and Maintenance panel. I'm really excited to talk to all these really talented panelists and learn everything there is to know about clarinet care, repair, and maintenance. I'll start off by introducing myself. I'm Ginny Mccoy. If you haven't attended the other panels, I'm the social media coordinator for the International Clarinet Association. You've probably gotten at least one email from me if you registered in the last day or two. So I hope you're all really excited for this panel.
Great. And I'm Jessica Harrie, and I will not be saying a whole lot. I'm going to monitor the Facebook page and bring questions in, but I'm the Executive Director of Operations for the ICA, and I'm really, really happy to be here. Thank you to our panelists for joining us.
If all of the panelists just want to introduce yourself, tell us about what got you into repair, where you're based, what kind of work you do, that'd be great.
Who'd like to go first? Melanie, you go first.
All right. Hi, everybody. I'm Melanie Wong. I currently work at RDG Woodwinds in Los Angeles. Before this, I was working at the Buffet Krempen showroom in New York City. How I got my start, I did an apprenticeship with a man named Mark Jacoby, who, if you don't know, is one of the leading clarinet technicians probably in the world. And that was how I started. I started after my master's in clarinet performance, and that was how I got into it. Was that it? Yeah. Go, Brian.
Sure. Yeah. My name is Brian Corbin, and I'm the owner of B. Corbin Clarinet Products. We do a little bit of everything, including repair as well. And actually, I got my start initially as an undergraduate in doing my music education degree. So I'm actually completely self-taught for the most part in repair. I've picked things up from people who have been really generous to show me things. But I am one of those cases where I tried to get an apprenticeship and just wasn't able to. And so I took the hard way, the long route, and it worked out for us. So we're here in Honolulu. My wife plays in the Navy Pacific Fleet Band here, and that's how we got all the way over here to the Pacific.
All right, I'm Jonathan Copeland, owner of Clarinets by Copeland. A lot of you may know me from when I worked at Onks Woodwind Specialist. So I own Clarinets by Copeland now, but I just recently moved and have my own shop now. So Clarinets by Copeland. I specialize in all clarinets. Any clarinet, I'll fix it. And so I specialize mainly in sales as well of buffet models. So I only sell buffet, refurbished buffet clarinets. And then for repairs, any brand, any model. And so I began my apprenticeship. I went to school with Jessica. And so in between my undergrad and grad work, I started an apprenticeship with Jason Onks at Onks Woodwind Specialist. And so he's an oboist, so don't hold it against him, but he taught me everything I know. And oboes are very meticulous, very particular instruments. So I learned some of the basic mechanics through oboe repair. And then I basically took over the clarinet division of Onks Woodwind Specialist. And so then now, since last year when I moved, I've actually took over the whole clarinet side of his business. And so he's just oboes now. So now I originally started my business as just a sales, refurbished instruments. And so now I have, the repair side and the sales side kind of working together. So that's kind of my business model. So yeah, that's me in a nutshell.
Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm John Weir. I'm co-owner of Taplin Weir in Toronto, Canada, with my wife, Patty Goodwin. We're well known for clarinet sales and the barrels we make and the bore gauge we make and ligatures we supply. I've been repairing woodwinds now for about 45 years and started out with an apprenticeship, and then about half a dozen years later started working for myself. I had a shop in Toronto from 1980 till 1996, and then I worked in the States for 10 years for what became Conn-Selmer as a director of research and development with woodwinds. and then came back and established again in Toronto and opened up Taplin Weir. So at this point, as far as the repairs go, I'm a specialist for clarinets and saxophones. There you go.
All right, thank you, everyone. So I just want to preface this panel by saying that any resources anyone has throughout this, please send them to the chat, send them to me or Jessica. You can email them to me at assistant@clarinet.org. I'm going to be collecting everything that we mentioned, every book, every YouTube video, everything, and we'll be publishing it to the website after this event. So feel free to chat in the panel, privately send me a message, email me, anything like that, that we can have a wonderful resource for all of you. I'd like to start out with a fun question for our panelists, maybe not so fun. Can you tell us about the worst clarinet that you ever had to repair, maybe your repair nightmares?
Well, I'll start, and I'll be honest with you. When I get an instrument that I don't want to repair, I send it off to somebody else. And so one clarinet that I saw, and I'm honest with you, there was a crack that I've never seen this in my life. I mean, the crack was 100% through the bore from the top to the bottom of the upper joint. And it was just not good. And I ended up giving this person the name of someone else who I said, look, I don't want to do this. This was early on in my repair career where if I'm honest with you, when you're self-taught, you got to really know what you're doing, right? You're messing with people's livelihood, right? So I don't recommend just handing your instrument to somebody who maybe doesn't really know what they're doing. But this particular cracks particularly aren't necessarily that difficult to repair or that big of a deal even. I think people kind of think they're bigger than they really are. But this one was so bad that, I mean, you could see through the inside. I mean, I don't know how it happened. And I sent it off, and this guy who fixed it did such an amazing job that you could almost not even tell that thing was cracked. And that one is always the story I tell because, this particular person thought that their clarinet was just done. They paid all this money for this thing, and a year later it's got this giant crack. And sort of the long and short of the story is that we found out the kind of care this person was taking care of their instrument and what actually led to that crack, because you don't see those very often. And it ended up being, it was user ignorance, to be honest. And so that particular repair was one I was like, I'm not doing this. I want to see if someone else can accomplish it. And they did. And that's how I found a network of repair people who are better than me that I can recommend all over the country.
Along those lines, I love, Brian, that you said you don't want to fix certain things, and you're saying about how you have to know what you're doing. It's so true. And that doesn't always happen, unfortunately. And so my worst repair that I've ever seen come across my bench was somebody who didn't know how to do a crack repair. And what they did, there were 2 tone holes that needed to be replaced. And when a tone hole is replaced, like, you as a layperson should not know the difference. You should not be able to tell that anything has changed. And instead, I'm just going to use like a random joint to show you, but like these 2 tone holes here, these are your top 2 trill keys. These had been replaced. And instead of looking like regular tone holes, they were sitting about this high up off of the instrument. They were sawed off unevenly, and then like the keys were just slammed onto them with a Valentino pad just like smushed on it. And then when I looked on the inside, where the person had drilled out the tone hole for the new one, it wasn't even sitting flush. So there was like a big gap where you could just see like strings of glue hanging down in it. That was the worst thing I've ever seen. It's pretty bad.
I don't think I can top that, but that's pretty good. Next, I guess the worst I've seen, kind of a twofold thing. So it was somebody had sent this instrument, and I can't remember the name. It was one of those like weird name instruments. Like, I got this on eBay. I want to get this fixed. And I'm like, I'll fix it, So the thumb tube, they said that there was the wrong thumb tube that was installed. And so I get it, and I'm looking at it, and the thumb tube was actually literally a piece of brass, probably from like a plumbing fitting from Home Depot, and somebody had like epoxied it in place. So I basically had to drill it out and extract it just to get it out. And then I did custom fabricate a whole new thumb tube. And then, but the worst part of the instrument was that it was probably, I don't know, just way, way, way too short. And so it was pitched totally different. Tone hole placement was off. So I'm thinking it was probably an instrument somebody was just like messing around trying to learn how to actually make a clarinet, because it was super, super old too. So, I mean, it was a very expensive repair, you know, especially doing the thumb tube. And then by the time I got it finished and I played it, it was horrendous. Like it played, it responded, but the intonation, it was not a clarinet. So that's probably my worst experience with a repair for sure. I felt bad for the client too, just, you know, because they had put so much money into it and it ended up being a dog.
For me, I would say, you know, there's a little theme going on here, and I don't think I could delineate one specific repair that was the worst. I've seen many of the worst. And, you know, the most damage that can be done to an instrument is usually by a so-called repair person. So I think the moral of that story is that when you take your instrument, your valuable instrument that you spend an enormous amount of time with, it's really important to check around and see who is capable of doing this. One of my pet peeves with this trade is there's no actual certification or qualification. So anybody can say, wow, I'm a repair person, I'm ready to go. And it's sadly far from the truth. There's many, many, many things that need to be learned. And Brian, in his little outline, was humble enough to say that, you know, he sidestepped some of the things that were beyond him in early times. And I think that's excellent, really. You know, I think in order to get to somebody who is very capable, it's really important for the musician to ask around and see who's qualified, see who the local symphony people are using. Just do a little groundwork and see who's capable in your area, particularly with things that are beyond just pad replacement. Cracks being certainly one of the biggest, and tone hole replacement, and things that require, you know, a more advanced level of skill. So I think that, you know, you really need to take a good look at who you're taking your instrument to. Beyond that, I think that the personal care and maintenance of your instrument is really important. Clarinets are wood, and with improper care can crack or change radically. And it's really important to follow a proper care and maintenance procedure as being a musician. Within the past year or so, I wrote a clarinet care and maintenance article for the Clarinet magazine. It's a pretty good one, and you could take a look at that and see the do's and don'ts of clarinet care from a wood perspective. So that would be, just as a general outline, would be what I'd say in this category.
Thank you all. Those are all very terrifying to hear about. And I'm seeing a few questions. Let's see, how can you know that you're taking your clarinet to a qualified repair person? So if you find a repair person, what questions can you ask to make sure that they're qualified, or is there anything that you should look for specifically in a repair person?
Yeah, well, I'll say that for me, the biggest thing, and I see a couple people already mentioned it, is ask around to people you trust. And one of the things that I used to always do when I was getting into being a little more qualified, where I was actually able to charge people for work, is I would say, hey, here's my clarinet. I just did this to my clarinet. What do you like about that? Or what don't you like? Or I would say, here's one I did for a friend. Why don't you go ask them if they'll allow you to play it a little bit, which not everyone does. And then you get an idea of feel. So one of the things you want to do is first ask around to people you trust, for sure, and especially people who perform at a high level, because a lot of times people think that a repair person may be really qualified, but it also, part of that is maybe their abilities don't allow them to stretch the clarinet as far as it can go. And there are certain things that you can do as a repair person to kind of hide some of the things that go on. And so there is a level of ability. That's why you want to ask people you trust. You want to ask if they can allow you to play instruments that they have worked on. You know, we specialize actually in setups on new instruments. I actually am getting out of mail order repair almost completely. And so one of the things that people will often do is they'll play a new instrument and they'll play a like overhauled used instrument. And most people actually prefer the feel of the overhauled used instrument because it doesn't matter the name brand. When you buy a new clarinet from most manufacturers, they still need additional work. And so ask your friends, ask your teachers and your colleagues, and then start asking some questions of the repair people and make sure they're knowledgeable and qualified. Maybe ask some questions like, what do you think about various pads? And if they say, well, you know, we only use this one pad and every other pad is bad. Well, they can have their opinion, but I think a qualified repair person will tell you the differences. Well, you can have Valentino pads here, but leather pads here will do well. But if you're in a humid environment, you know, that kind of thing. So have a list of questions, talk to some people, and if you can, try some of their work, and that's going to give you the best idea.
I agree with everything Brian just said, every single thing.
So we have another, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Go ahead.
No, I was just kidding. There's really not much to add. I would just say that as far as like asking advice, like make sure you trust that person. I think you mentioned that, Brian, because I've seen a few cases where people have sent things places, and then when you get it, it's like, well, so and so said, you know, this was a great place, and they get it, and it's not been such a great experience. So just make sure you trust that person, and then I would go like you were saying, Brian, and actually ask, like, can I play your clarinet? You know, can I try, or can I at least look at it? And you may not know what you're looking at, but really probing those questions. And then if your students listening to this, ask your professor, you know, who do you take it to, or who, you know, what do you think of this person if you're wondering. I would be very hesitant to ever just show up at a repair place unless it was an absolute emergency. Do your research, and yeah, there's really not much I'm adding there, just except for really do your due diligence to research and make sure, you know, look at their website, see the services they're offering. Yeah, and then it really is like, I mean, I hate to say it, but once you go, you're gonna know. So if you go and you're not happy, at least bring those concerns to us. Like I know I would want somebody to bring those concerns to me if they weren't happy. But let that experience tell you that as well. So yeah.
I'm seeing a question that is actually, oh, I keep interrupting everyone. I'm so sorry. A question that
I'll add one small thing. Is I think looking into a repair person, what you're looking for really is a long-term relationship with somebody very capable. Recently, clarinetist Jonathan Gunn made a post, and he mentioned that he'd been working with repair person Tim Clark for, I think, since the beginning of his tenure with orchestra in Cincinnati. And I just commented on it, and Tim came back and said, thank you. But I think the point of this is that the best you can get out of your instrument is if you're giving your instrument to somebody very capable and having them follow through with the instrument for a long period of time. You get to know each other, you get to know, you know, what they're looking for in touch, intonation, characteristics, all the specifics of both being a high-level musician. If the repair person understands that to a greater degree, all the better. And also instruments, particularly in terms of intonation, it's hard to do everything in one session. So a long-term relationship can really bring out the absolute best in the instrument you're playing. So I think truly that's what you're looking for.
That's all really wonderful advice. I saw a question that I think is going to be applicable to a lot of people watching this. Some brave soul asked, what if, hypothetically, your clarinet has been sitting somewhere since March and you haven't found the occasion to practice it? what should you do? Is there any basic repairs that you can do at home or anything that you can do the next time you take it out to re-break it in, or what advice would you have for that? One other question along those lines, are there any ways to disinfect your clarinet, reeds, or other equipment, especially for school shared instruments?
I don't want to hog all the questions, so someone else can answer first.
Well, I mean, your mouthpieces, you can use a solution of either half white vinegar and water, and if you were to do that, you would put the mouthpiece in so that the cork is out. The cork is not touching any liquid. You could also do it with lemon juice and water, and recently I've even heard peroxide and water, where you do like a half and half solution, and any of those will clean your mouthpiece. That's not something that you want to do like every single day, but you could do that maybe like once every couple of weeks or so. Anyone feel free to add to that, but then, because I think the question was for specifically for the COVID time, and unless anyone has any new information, there's not so much you can do. Like, we can't recommend you putting alcohol on the wood or anything like that. Please do not ever do that. But if you think that your instrument was exposed somehow, you can wait. The current guidelines are 3 to 5 days, and then the virus would like die off naturally if it did get exposed. And then really you wouldn't have to worry about like reinfecting yourself, but don't let other people play your instrument. I think shared instruments in schools, I don't know what's going to happen with that, but that's going to be something that schools are going to have to figure out, and band instructors are going to have to figure out going forward, because that really probably can't happen and is not really going to mesh with any sort of guideline. Yeah.
Another question that someone had is, what is your break-in process for a new clarinet?
Yeah, it's funny because you can ask 5 people, you'll get 5 different answers. And I don't know that there's any one proven thing that can tell you it's going to work or not. I'll tell you that most people that I talk to generally say it's really kind of a simple thing. You just start playing on it, and for a short amount of time, and then you sort of build that up over time. One really popular method is, simply to play, maybe 15 to 30 minutes a day for the first week, and then you kind of bump it up over time. I'm actually of the mindset that what's even more important is making sure when an instrument is new that you keep the moisture controlled. So you're swabbing, and if you're going to play for half an hour, I actually swab every 15 minutes. So if I buy a brand new clarinet, I want to play it for the first week. I might only play it for half an hour a day, but I swab twice a day. Maybe the next week I play for half an hour 2 times a day. I know a lot of people who say don't even do that much. I know people who say it doesn't matter. If a clarinet's going to crack, it's going to crack. But general guidelines for me, I tell my clients, look, take care of it in the way that, you probably would imagine. Start easy, allow the wood to accept moisture, because for the most part, that wood has been dry, it has not received moisture for quite a long time. And you want to make sure that the instrument receives that moisture in a way that's going to allow it to be more stable over time. One of the biggest misconceptions I think people have is that your clarinet cracked because you didn't break it in properly. And I just don't buy that at all. I think that it can absolutely crack from mistreatment. There's no doubt about it. But there are many reasons why clarinets do crack. And really, it's all pretty simple in terms of organic material like the wood expanding and contracting and various things. So for me, there are so many different answers. I'm curious to hear what the other repair technicians have to say. But for me, it's I generally say it takes about a month for you to get up to about an hour of playing time. And for me, I found after about a month in general, you can play on it safely, but the clarinet will still continue to sort of develop and break in.
One thing I want to add to what Brian said about swabbing, when you do go to swab your clarinet, one thing people often overlook is actually drying out the sockets. So like, if this is your lower joint, in here, in these sockets, and that's also in your barrel and in your bell, those areas collect a lot of water. And so you can take your swab or a secondary swab or something and clean out all of those areas. and that will help a lot. As well as if you like blow out because water will also collect in the tone holes. So if you actually like close up the clarinet and blow through it, like, and it'll blow, and then open all the keys, like as you're blowing through, it'll blow some of that water that's sitting collecting out, and that will help. Yeah.
You know, the real cause of a clarinet cracking is an imbalance in moisture within the wood body of the clarinet. So what tends to happen as you know, when people play an instrument, is the inner bore of the instrument gets obviously much more wet, and the inner cells of the wood are taking on moisture on the inside and swelling. If the outside of the wood is dry, and that means the cells on the outside would be shrinking, and that imbalance gets too great, then the pressure will go somewhere and it will crack the instrument. So as a musician, what you need to do is keep the wood in balance the best you possibly can. I think with a new instrument, this is extra critical because the wood has been sitting for a long time, and as you add moisture from the inside to it, if the outside hasn't caught up in terms of being in balance, then a crack can occur fairly early on. So now we're entering, for the most of us in North America, we're entering summertime, humid time, and the humid times are certainly the best times to break in an instrument because the instrument stays within balance much better. If you're starting to break in an instrument in the winter months where it's dry outside and you're putting you know, wet moisture on the inside, then the inside is swelling and the outside is dry, and so you are in greater risk of cracking the instrument early on. As Melanie in particular said, I mean, it's really important in the early days of clarinet to swab it, and wipe the water out of the sockets and blow the water out of the tone holes. Often a clarinet will crack through the top trill keys on a clarinet. Guess why? Because there's water sitting in those top tone holes. So, you know, blow the water out of those holes the best you can. You need to, when you finish playing, put your instrument back in the case, and you know, absolutely in the winter months you have to have a humidifier inside in order to keep the instrument within balance. And there are various humidifiers on the market, but the best ones are ones that offer a constant humidity all the time. There are some that you have to keep adding water to, and it's hard to remember to always keep adding water to, and then your instrument is kind of on a roller coaster ride as it's getting drier and getting moisture and drier and moisture. And what you want, particularly in early days, is to keep it as constant as you possibly can. I would say you should adhere to a break-in period. I actually know some principal symphonic players who actually break in a new instrument over a period of a year. But it is important, I think, at the beginning to start at, you know, 15 minutes a day, and then, you know, a couple weeks down the road, half an hour a day, and you know, up into the point where you're playing a couple hours a day. But keeping the instrument in the best balance possible is the target, truly.
Yeah, I would add just one thing. As far as the moisture, I agree 100% with what everybody said. With as far as moisture, something to think about too, as well, is the temperature of the actual instrument itself. So if the instrument's cold to the touch, and then you blow warm air into it, that's a big no-no. So I'm always recommending people, and I have a theory that the reason why most clarinets crack on the upper part is because that's where your warm air is reaching first. So I have no scientific data to back that up, just experience. But that's what I kind of see. Like, you know, a lot of times, you know, when cracks come into my shop, I'll start pinpointing like what happened, and it's usually some kind of sudden temperature change, or, you know, like I get a lot of clients, like, you know, I went to Middle Tennessee State, and the music room was, you know, or the choir room was super, you know, hot, and then one room would be like super cold, and you're just going from room to room, and And those temperature changes really drastically affect that. So I always recommend, like, keep your hands around the upper part of the upper joint. You can kind of keep it close to your body, especially if you're an orchestral musician. And I'm sorry for the A clarinets, like, I don't really know what to say for that. Like, to keep it warm, like while you're swapping in between pieces. The best advice I can give is just to keep your instrument warm, and is from the outside first, and not just blowing warm air. So especially like band directors, a lot, like I'm always correcting students on this. Like, band directors will always say, hey, blow warm air through your instrument so you can keep it warm. And that's the exact opposite of what you want to do. What's going to happen is that the inside bore is warming up, and that, like John had mentioned, that the outside is still kind of condensed and kind of brittle, you could say. And so when you blow warm air into it, it's going to begin to expand slightly. That outside, that's when it's going to pop. And so a lot of times that's when I see a lot of the really big ones, is when there's been some kind of major drastic temperature change. And one question I saw on the comments real quick about the green line material. I don't know about you all, I was kind of interested to see what you all would say, the other repair panelists. I haven't seen a green line crack, like an actual crack, but I've seen the tendons break off quite a bit. So that's going to be you're weighing that. The material is more brittle, and I haven't seen it crack, but I have seen tendons break. So any of you all seen cracks? Or
green lines actually can crack, but it is extremely, extremely rare, particularly on the clarinets. The oboes, they can crack, but yeah, it's just very, very rare, and it's, compared to wood, there's like no contest. But they'll crack really oddly. Obviously, there's no grain for it to crack on, so like it'll crack almost like like horizontally, like sideways diagonal, instead of straight up and down like we're used to seeing. It's really bizarre. I've only seen like 2 ever, but it can happen.
Cool.
So
Jonathan's points concerning temperature were spot on.
A few questions that I saw, maybe a quicker answer, would be, do you swab from top to bottom or bottom to top, and why? And then maybe a little bit more of a loaded question, to oil or not to oil, and why?
I'm a top to bottom person. For swabbing, it is, in my opinion, much safer for as far as like getting your swab stuck or not getting your swab stuck. If the swab does get stuck, it's going to get stuck around the register tube. And you have a lot more leverage, and the thick part of the swab is like out of the clarinet if you do it from the top, whereas if you do it from the bottom, it's all in there and you will have like no leverage to pull it back out. So that's my
I'm with you, Melanie. I'm top to bottom as well. And I had this just handy dandy over here. So I use a swab. I don't know what you all use, but I think it's thinner, and there's less likelihood of it bunching up and getting kind of stuck there. Now, one thing I will say is I've seen a lot of swabs where like there's a lot, I don't know if it's probably hard to see, but you can, there'll be knots and stuff, and they're already just kind of like, you're just waiting for that to get stuck. And so what you need to do is just when you're pulling that swab through, do it very slowly. Like I see a lot of people, especially students, when they're in a hurry, and they just like pull it through. And usually that's when it'll kind of like double up on itself. But if you're just very like methodical, just very slow and gentle as you're pulling through, it's very, likely that you're not going to get that stuck, in the upper part near that register tube. But that's another reason I recommend silk, just because it's thinner, and it won't bunch up as much. But curious what you all have to say too.
I mean, I also swap from the top down, or at least I recommend people do that. And it's really, again, if you think about what Melanie was saying, one of the things that you want to think about is it's actually easier to remove a stuck swab if you are swabbing from the top than from the bottom. And the reason is because if you take just the upper joint of the clarinet and let's say you try to go from the bottom, or you have the whole clarinet together, well, you'll have all that string hanging out, but you won't have any of the other end. And so if you actually swab from the top, if something does get stuck pretty quickly, you know, we probably all have little tools and things that are effectively just rods that you could, if it came to that, right, you could get that out, but it is much easier overall to get a stuck swab if you do go from the top. In terms of material, I'm actually still kind of playing around with what I like, to be honest, because you want to think about a couple of different things for swabs. Yes, the absorbency, the moisture absorbency, but also the abrasiveness. And so one of the things people don't often think about is that different materials have different, you know, they're abrasive in different ways. And when I say abrasive, we're talking about you can actually polish your bore with a swab. So for example, I make personally now some chamois swabs, like real chamois, not the sort of, you know, fake stuff that you can buy. And the thing about chamois is it's incredibly absorbent, and I personally like it, but it does actually leave a visible polish in the clarinet. And there are some people who have different opinions on whether the bore should or shouldn't be polished and that type of thing. So that's just another consideration to think about, but the jury's still out on what I actually prefer. But I do generally recommend actually microfiber to the general lay public.
Two things I would just add. I see everyone asking about mouthpieces, swabbing mouthpieces. I don't recommend you swab mouthpieces for exactly the reason Brian is mentioning, because you are basically changing the inside if you swab your mouthpiece a lot. The rubber, it moves. And I forgot the other thing I was going to add, so that's it.
And I'm just going to double up one more on that, if that's okay, is I actually do swab mouthpieces every once in a while. When I do swab mouthpieces, I only use silk though. And the way I swab a mouthpiece is by making sure that when I swab the mouthpiece, I have a much smaller mouthpiece swab. It's not a large clarinet swab. That's really important. It's got to be the right shape, and it has to be much smaller. I just cut my own. And then the other thing is when I swab a mouthpiece, I actually protect the tip rail. Depending on what type of metal weight you have at the end of your swab, that can actually do the most damage. And so I do swab with a small swab. I actually pull it upwards as I'm pulling out so that I'm actually avoiding the facing. And maybe there's a little risk to that, but personally, I do swab every once in a while. You can achieve the same thing with Q-tips, you know, or things like that. So that's something to be aware of if you're a little wary of that.
That was the other thing I was going to say, the shape. The shape of the swab is extremely important. A long time ago, there were these like square swabs. I don't know if you guys remember those. And those like always got stuck, you know, and as opposed to now everything's more of like some sort of teardrop shape. And that usually does better.
You know, I think part of that question, we've gotten talking about swabs, but I think part of that question was whether to oil a clarinet or not. And I would say, yes, you should. In my view, the oil provides a barrier so that the clarinet doesn't absorb moisture too quickly. It slows down the absorption of moisture. Grenadilla as a wood is a very, very dense and oily wood. It's about as dense as wood gets on planet Earth. But obviously it's affected by humidity because we see these instruments crack. So there's proof positive. So a light oiling through the instrument, and a light oiling is good, but even will keep the moisture from being absorbed into the wood too quickly, and also prevent the water from tracking in a certain place through habit. So I do think oiling is a good idea. I think the amount of oiling kind of depends upon many things: the climate that you live in, the amount you're playing, your own saliva has some impact on that. I've noticed that the people whose individual chemical makeup tends to erode key plating and break down things are also people that tend to have a greater tendency to crack instruments. So I think that their saliva has some impact on that. And you know, a light oiling on a reasonably constant basis, I think, is an excellent idea and certainly can do no harm.
I would add to that as well. I 100% agree. So Jason Ox, the guy I used to work with and learn from, he told me a story. One time there was a repair tech he knew that actually took a piece of granadillo wood and soaked it in oil for like, I don't know, like 12 months, like something crazy long. And then they actually cut into the wood, after this experiment, and the oil had not penetrated the wood as deep as they thought, especially if you're leaving it in there for 12 months. And so I'm with John. I think it provides a barrier from the moisture, but it's also Jason used to tell me as well. The way I learned about this was, you would oil a nice piece of furniture, right? Like if you had a really nice antique piece of furniture, you would oil it. You'd put oil on it, and it for one, it just makes it look better. Let's be honest. But one thing I do want to add about oiling is that you just have to be careful if you're doing it yourself of getting oil on the pads, especially skin pads and leather pads, and Valentino pads can be cleaned up a little bit easier, but still they get sticky. So just being very careful if you're going to do it yourself, to not get it on the pads. And the way in my shop, I recommend, annual service where it's in and I'm cleaning it. And that's usually when I will oil it and give it a real good, thorough oiling, for sure then. But also, using a feather, like especially with like oboes, you can use like a turkey feather, and you can actually run that in there and slightly get that just coated on the inside. And I would just keep that in mind, that to be so careful of getting it on the pads, because you can ruin them really quick by getting oil on your pads. So there's different techniques. You can get different things that kind of like the pads that are actually closed. You can maybe, like I use I have a lot of razor blades here. So like the little cardboard coverings, like I've showed people how you can kind of push those up underneath like keys in different spots to kind of hold it away from so if you're running that oil through there, it's not going to get on the underside. So that's one method. And it's a lot easier to show in person, to do those things. So if you're not comfortable doing that, I wouldn't recommend, because you can damage different things doing that as well. But yeah, just being careful, being, diligent about, knowing and feeling comfortable with what you're doing with that. And if you don't, like I would, if you brought it to me, I would oil it for you, even if that's all you wanted. If you just wanted, I'd be happy to do that. So yeah, that's kind of my philosophy on oiling.
I'll just mention one more thing. I did see, some people talking about, what kind of oil to use and that kind of thing. And I think what you want to understand from a scientific perspective is that, if you try to use just any kind of oil, let's say you go to your local music store and you just buy a thing of boar oil. Chances are that's not very effective because the low quality ingredients, but also because of molecular size. And one of the important things that we have to consider is, Jonathan mentioned this experiment, and I've seen a couple of other experiments like that. And it looks like maybe it's some definitive evidence, but in reality, depending on what oil you use, if you use an oil that has a larger molecular size, it's not going to penetrate even a porous wood. And so you want to use a smaller molecular size oil. A lot of people I see use, say almond oil, and that works fine. Those are small molecular sizes. If you've got olive oil lying around, I wouldn't recommend that because then you're talking about things like rancidity and possible things that can happen. So I would recommend if that's the closest thing to you, an almond oil, you have that works. I also saw someone mention about reducing the water buildup in the tone holes from oiling. And I actually find this to be the case, although it's not as dramatic as I think maybe people want it to be. When I was first learning repair, I was actually a music education student at Indiana University, and my professor there, we were talking, and he said, I've heard someone soaking a shoelace in oil and then laying it alongside the instrument put together away from the tone holes. And effectively, like John was saying, you're creating a barrier. And so now we know how water and oil mix, they generally don't, right? And so, I was having a lot of problems, let's say with my side B flat, E flat, just getting a lot of water. I'd play for 10 minutes and already I'm blowing spit out. I did that little trick. And for about, 4 or 5 days, I stopped getting water in that tone hole. And so that to me said something about at least the way water and oil will interact. So I do recommend oiling. I do recommend using a small molecular size oil. And I think the end of the day, when you talk about this debate about oiling, it's almost like, well, what harm could come from oiling? There's probably more harm that could come from not oiling than any harm that can be done by oiling, in my opinion. So that's one thing to consider.
Okay, so I'm seeing a lot of really good questions. It's hard to choose all of them. I think a popular one that I saw earlier on is, what can you do regularly to extend the life of your clarinet, or maybe some common issues that you see. If people just did this, then maybe they wouldn't have to take their clarinet into the shop so often.
Annual maintenance. If you bring it in for annual maintenance, you know, that's usually, a lot of times you don't have to do anything else for the year. It's like going to get your teeth checked at the dentist. You know, they'll catch you before you get cavities and before you need a root canal. It's the same thing that we do.
Yeah, 100%. And I'll say it reduces, especially instruments that you know, and I say you all would attest to this as well. Instruments you've worked on and you've seen them before, most of the time they're in better shape. So when you see them on that annual basis, it's very quick and easy just to kind of disassemble, clean, you know, take care of the issues that may have popped up, you know, during that year. But most of the time, my clients that do that regularly, I do not see them until their annual appointment. They don't have those emergency issues. But then the clients that'll wait, like, I have one in mind that I always joke with about it, but, you know, say like 2 or 3 years, and then you finally see them again, like, well, they'll come in because, you know, like, this pad fell off, or, you know, this cork fell off, or my tinted corks are spinning and falling off. And it's one of those things that things are going to break, but when you're coming in on that regular basis, I always harp on this, is that it's like an oil change. You know, if you don't get your oil change, your car's going to explode. You know, so and not only that, is there's abrasive buildup inside of your keys, and you're only creating more issues with your keys getting unstable, and keys that are unstable make for unstable clarinets. So you know, you could have the best pad work and loose key work, and it's going to be a horrible instrument, because your keys are just going to be wobbly and not sealing the way they need to every time. So having that annual maintenance, you're removing that abrasive material that builds up over that year's time, and that's just very crucial for clarinet repair. I was hoping we would talk about this, because that's like my number one thing is annual maintenance. Love it. So.
I mean, I think more important than even that is preventative maintenance. And for me, you know, because I worked and taught in a lot of, especially low income areas when I was student teaching in other places. And so what I noticed was a lot of people don't have the opportunity, or maybe even the financial situation to take, you know, their clarinets in as regularly as they should, especially considering how much playtime they put on it. So for me, I always give clients just kind of really basic, easy things that it seems obvious to us because we're professionals, but maybe it's not obvious to others. So for example, I used to leave my clarinets out on the stand without putting them in the case for a long time. And that was fine for years for me. I didn't have any problem with that. When we moved to Hawaii, because we were literally living on a volcano, there's a high amount of sulfur content. So if you leave your clarinet out, and this happened to us for 3 days, the whole thing was tarnished. It's sort of the same reason why you buy one of those new Van Doren mouthpieces, right? And a lot of times if you put it in your case, you'll start to see some tarnish around where your mouthpiece was. It's harmless for the most part. It's just sulfur. And so I say, keep your clarinet in the case if you're not using it. It's so tempting for us to leave it on a stand, or I'm going to play it again in a few hours. I'm going to play it tomorrow. But I recommend, if just for safety's sake, don't leave it out. Put it in the case if you're not using it, especially depending on where you are, because the elements can have an effect. People don't even, maybe they don't think about there's a vent right above of where they're leaving their clarinet. So the basic things, if you want to keep your clarinet in good shape, do the things that, you know, every day would make a difference, including buying those little paintbrushes and dusting out the dust between, you know, the chimneys and the mechanisms, which is going to cause, you know, buildup, you know, as we mentioned earlier. Those are just little things that you can do to prevent some of that in the future.
I want to add, you can also, something I love is disposable mascara brushes. They're usually really soft and plastic, and you can clean a lot of crap out with those.
I think it would be great if all of you got together, any repair person. I would love to see this personally. If you got together and did some kind of videos, maybe worthy of anyone that watches Dr. Pimple Popper, but maybe Dr. Clarinet Cleaner, and you took videos of all the gunk that comes out of your instrument. I, for one, would love to see that, but I don't know if anyone else would or not. Let's see, there's a lot of questions coming in. Let's see. One earlier back, how to get started in repair. If you're interested in becoming a repair technician, what advice would you have?
Who's gonna go?
Who's gonna go?
Come on, John.
No, I don't care. So I did an apprenticeship, and I know Brian was saying he was self-taught. And so take this for a grain of salt. But so Jason Ox, who I work for, he used to say, so he went to a year-long repair school. I can't remember the name of the school, but he actually said he learned what not to do as an oboe specialist at this school. And so I could be biased. That's why I say take it as a grain of salt. But I do believe the apprenticeship method is the best. Even just teaching in general, if you can work side by side with somebody that's further along than you, and they're teaching you and kind of bringing you along with them, that's the best teaching method, I think, because you're basically, like, the experience I had with Jason was that I could work on something and I thought it was perfect, and then I would take it to him and he would show me like 10 things, and I'm like, no, it's perfect. What's going on here? And I remember getting so frustrated at the beginning, when I first started with pad work. Like, you would think you have pads the way they need to be. And that's one of my biggest things is that, I feel like as repair people, we sometimes get hung up on some of the extra stuff, and we kind of miss the pad work stuff. So my whole point in all this is to say is the apprenticeship, it's an accountability thing. Like, so it just kind of shows you what you're basically, if you're in a school, you may get kind of overlooked if there were like a bunch of different repair people in the room. But if you're one-on-one, side by side, you can be like, hey, I've been working on this for an hour, help me, like I can't get this pad to level out, or I can't get this key to tighten up. And that was the experience I felt like I had, and it was hard. I'll be honest, it was tough to be corrected so many times. And I will say Jason is a perfectionist for sure, if any of you all know him. But probably one of the best people and repair people that I've ever known. So he was also my just a good spiritual mentor to me. So I believe just wholeheartedly in the apprenticeship model. I think that's just the best model to move forward in anything, but definitely repair. So.
And I agree. And I should clarify, when I say self-taught, that's not really fair because, I started as a music education student, like I said, and my actual desire was to be able to help students out. So I was going to be the next greatest band director the world's ever seen. And I still might be. But at the point that I was learning, I thought, man, what about a student that comes in your band room that morning and they have an issue, they can't play. What are you going to do? Tell them to play on a pencil? Because that's what I was told, in certain cases. And so what if you could just quickly identify, it's just a spring hook. That's a 15-second fix. And so that's how I started. I bought $100 musicmedic.com repair kit or something when I was a sophomore at IU. And I learned that way. And Jonathan's point is he was corrected a lot. And I wish I was corrected a lot because I ended up spending a lot of money and resources buying, really crappy clarinets on eBay. And when you're self-teaching, you're usually not doing things correctly the first way. And so that's really important to know. The way, if someone's really wanting to get into repair, first thing I say is don't, get into repair enough to keep your instrument in good shape, but send it to somebody else who's more qualified because it takes a lot of time. And I think a lot of people think maybe it's more glamorous than it really is. But every one of these guys will tell you they spend a lot of time and looking at some of the meticulous work that has to be done. It's really, really involved. I also went out and asked people. I tried to get apprenticeships. At the time, not many people were open. And so I think Jonathan's right. That's the best way to do it. But we don't live in a time where that's as popular as it used to be. And so the last thing I'll say is, my repair skills got better as I got better as a player. So when I first started doing repair, charging people, you know, $5 to recork because that's what it cost me to buy the cork and I needed to practice. That's one thing. But as I got better and started becoming more refined and realizing that maybe I shouldn't be slamming my hands down to play the clarinet, you actually start to get better. And so I say, if you really want to get into repair, first learn how the instrument works. And that comes from not only a mechanical aspect, but also a playing aspect. You don't have to be a player to be a great technician, but it does make the job easier.
I agree with the apprenticeship thing, but I do want to add, a lot of it depends on what you want to do or you think you want to do with your career. Repair schools are a really great option for somebody who wants to just do general repairs. And if you talk to a lot of people who went to repair schools, a lot of them will tell you that what they do is they actually get you ready for an apprenticeship. And maybe not the type of apprenticeship that we're talking about that's a one-on-one thing, but an apprenticeship where you're the new guy in a shop that does a lot of school instruments. That's what a repair school really gets you ready for. If you look at the top technicians, you know, in any field, most of them did apprentice with a specialist, you know, and that's basically what we've all done here, I think. You know, and Brian's saying he wishes he had more of that. And it's like, that's really the only way, because I saw somebody ask about like a virtual school, and I'm not against virtual school. You can learn a lot, but you won't have that accountability. You know, you may think, so if I teach you how to seat a pad virtually, you know, and then you go to check it, there's all sorts of feel going on that you have to learn. And, you know, if I don't get to check it for you myself, you may think you had it great and you could be way off. And I don't know how a virtual school will address those sorts of things. That's one example of just an infinite amount of little details that are really difficult to catch yourself. Yeah.
Do you have any books that you would recommend for people to learn repair basics, or maybe learn more about how the clarinet works and the mechanics of the clarinet? And along with that, any repair items that we can have, accessories, humidifiers, tools, anything like that you would recommend for every clarinetist of all ages and ability levels?
Yeah, there are a list of books. I mean, I will say that some of them are more outdated than others, but I actually would recommend starting not with the repair book, but with a musical acoustic book. There's a book called Fundamentals of Musical Acoustics by Arthur Binet, and you know, it's all instruments. So there's one section on, you know, kind of woodwinds and clarinet and oboe, and eventually that ended up helping me develop my own line of barrels. But when you understand the acoustics of the instrument before you actually start repairing, it makes the job a little easier. So I can send you a list as well, Jenny. But there's also a book, I believe it's called, is it Clarinet Revealed? I believe, and that's originally in French. If you can read French, even better, because when it's translated into English, you actually lose a little bit. But I think it's, I can't remember the author. Maybe somebody else can remember. There's a really old book, Eric Brand, that instrument manual, and you know, for general repair, it has a lot. It actually even has refacing information in there for general repair.
Hey, it's really not that old.
It's well, okay. It's true. It's not that old, but we've developed a lot of materials today that we use that are a lot better. So, you know, you go to a general repair shop and they may just put cork bumpers on everything. But probably if you talk to repair guys, repair people, I should say, excuse me, then they'll tell you that there are some better materials for things like silencing and all of that. So there are some great resources and books, and I'll happily send you a list of things that I learned, because again, being sort of self-taught, I had to make a lot of mistakes, and I had to gain a lot of, you know, resources of my own. Even online, there are articles. One of the biggest articles that helped me in terms of tuning and things was Clark Fogues. He actually has an article. I think maybe it's still up. I printed it years ago and have it, you know, stored away. And in that article, he talks about tuning and undercutting and different things. And I read that extensively before I even started doing my own experiments with accessories. So there's a lot of literature out there. You have to kind of dig, and you also have to be willing to read them about 8 or 10 times before you fully digest some of that. And sorry, John, you're right. It's not that old.
Yeah, and I do want to add something to what Melanie said. I thought that was spot on about the pad work. I would say the virtual thing, it would be the same thing as reading a book. Like, you can read a book about how to install a pad. But pad work is an art. It really is. It's a feel that, and it's not even the feel of the feeler gauge, but it's the feel of the way you're squeezing the keys.
Mm-hmm.
It's a light finger pressure, and it's yeah. I mean, it's something that you have to experience. It's not really something that you're gonna gain from. I mean, you'll get premises from a book, but then it's really gonna just be that trial and error, and you'll know quickly if you have a pad wrong. So, yeah.
I guess finally I would add to all this that if you have an interest in repair and going in that direction, I have noticed that people become interested in it as a way of making some level of income in the music industry. And you know, let me assure you that working at a high level in repair is just as difficult as becoming a first-rate clarinetist. There's so many things that go into it to do it at a high level that if you're going to go into it, you need to take it on not as a sideline, but something that you put everything you can into. The same as if you were pursuing a position as a principal in a symphony or teacher at a university, or, you know, that it's nothing to be taken lightly, and it's also there's an awful lot of depth that needs to be explored in order to get to a good level.
So another question that we had earlier is, how do you educate other clarinetists or parents of younger clarinetists to avoid lesser quality equipment? I don't think we have to name any names specifically, but I think we can all agree that some clarinets and their accessories are not of the same level as other pieces. So is there anything that you say when people bring in these instruments that you can say, instead of, you know, buying this instrument, if you bought this or did this, it would be better? How do you help educate the general clarinet public on that?
I can't really answer this. I only work on professional level instruments, so I am very lucky that I don't have to do that.
Well, I'll say that, you know, being in the band world, the music education world, you see this a lot. And when I go into a classroom, you know, I'll even see in a teacher's, you know, they hand out a syllabus, right, to the class, and it'll often mention instrument-shaped objects, right, and things you can get that were made very poorly for $100 on Amazon, that kind of thing. So I do see those green and red clarinets that are less than ideal in the classroom. And, you know, actually I think the law is that you actually can't tell your parents to not buy certain brands. I've seen actual things in trial happen. So I wouldn't mention any brands, and I've seen teachers try to avoid that. And the way they do that is by simply offering really quality brands, right? So names that we know and trust. That's one way. You're definitely going to miss some high quality stuff. But another way is to explain to parents, and we all do this, and that doesn't mean it's going to help. Explain to them that you may be investing less money right now, but you're going to invest more money in the long run on these instruments that, you know, if you bring me one of these clarinets that you pay $200 for, and I need to get a part, I can't get that part, you know. And so that's one thing. Parents will often say, well, my child is a, you know, brand new student, or maybe even, you know, if you're a major in college, you don't know if you're going to have a long-term success in terms of playing the clarinet. But the thing about even someone not sure how long they're going to play is, if you buy a better quality clarinet, you're going to have better purchasing power and resale power. So if you buy, you know, a used insert popular clarinet name brand here, for a little bit more money, you're going to be able to get maybe longer life, but also potentially a better return on investment in terms of playing and financial. So I tell people generally when I talk to music educators, look, here's some brands that I know and trust that I've worked with, you know, but more importantly, pretty much the price will tell you for the most part. That's not always the case. But if you're going to buy a clarinet and the clarinet's $300 and comes with white gloves on Amazon, probably not going to be the best choice.
Okay, so I'm looking for more questions. If anyone has anything to say, please chime in, or anything specific that you want to add. I'm sure I've missed a lot of questions buried among other questions. They've all been really good.
Well, people are asking about how long buffets last. And, you know, I can say a lot of that question depends, or at least in my opinion, depends greatly on what your own level of playing is and what you're doing with it. So if you're an amateur and you don't play all that often, your clarinet can last you your whole life. You know, there's nothing wrong with playing a 50-year-old clarinet. Most professionals in symphony orchestras, they tend to go through instruments probably between 6 and 10 years is pretty average. Some will go slightly longer, some will go slightly less, but that's a pretty average, an average time. You know, you have to think if you're a student, like a college conservatory student, you play the clarinet a lot. So, you know, even though you may not be a professional yet, you're playing it as much and sometimes more than the professionals do. So yours is, you know, for me, I don't like when my college clients, you know, sometimes when they're buying a new clarinet, if they're young in their career, they think like, this is going to be the clarinet for the rest of my life. It won't be, you know, you'll get another clarinet. So I don't know if that helps, but.
This one's good. How do you know when your clarinet is blown out and it's time to buy a new one?
Man, there's some controversy here. And I'm gonna be honest with you. When we talk about clarinets blowing out, I think the important thing is actually to clarify what we're talking about. Because if we're talking about from a scientific perspective of just like the bore is now changed from what it was before, that happens. Like that's an actual thing that can happen, right? Your bore can change. That doesn't mean what a lot of people consider as being blown out. And so for me, when you know, I've talked to people who I trust and really respect, and they have different viewpoints for sure. But for me, I would get tired of the instrument before the instrument ended up really giving out. And what I mean by that is because I've played thousands of clarinets, sometimes you play a clarinet that just feels a little bit better than yours. And so all of a sudden mine's blown out now, right? Well, not necessarily. A lot of it is actually the setup. So people will think their clarinet's blown out, but get it overhauled and you'll get another 5 years out of that thing. Because what you don't know is that you may have microscopic leaks. You may have leaks in the body of the instrument. Maybe there's a post or something that has a leak. And so when you talk about blowout, are we talking about bore change? Yes, that actually does happen. There are ways to restore that. I personally just recommend buying a new clarinet if you don't like it anymore. But then there's also the thing that people experience. They'll say things like, I'm losing resistance, right? So suddenly the instrument is freer than it used to be, or maybe the tuning has gone out of whack. 50% of the time when people say my clarinet's blown out, is out of tune, they have like half their tone holes are built up with crap. And so a lot of times they think it's blown out and it's not. I would say the setup is the most important thing. But at the end of the day, if your clarinet is doing generally what it needs to do, you should be a happy camper.
Yeah, that's good info. I'm with you, Brian, on the blowout thing. There's just been so many times that customers will bring in. Obviously, remember I sell refurbished, you know, clarinets, so I do a lot of work on older clarinets, and it's amazing to see the difference between when one is set up properly. And I'm talking like tight key work, you know, pads covering the way they need to. And it's one of those things that's hard to tell. I think that's why it's so controversial. Like unless you could play the clarinet 50 years ago and then play it today, like who knows? And you don't know what another repair guy has done to it along that. Like they could have reamed something or added something or, you know, did some undercutting that shouldn't have been done. And you don't know, like if you buy that used instrument later, what has happened, you know, during that timeline. So I always start with, hey, let's get it in shape. Let's get it in good working condition before you make your decision. And that's always a good place to start. Because if the instrument is not functioning properly, you got to think our natural tendency as human beings when something is not working is to grip harder, right? Like we're gonna we're going to squeeze harder. And that's where you're going to see, even just in musicians and students, where their technique is sloppy. Usually it's because they're, for one, maybe haven't been taught, but a lot of times it's because their instrument is just in poor shape and they're making it work. And so that plays into it, how much you're having to work up here versus it just being natural and just working the way it needs to work. So when an instrument is functioning properly, not only is it sealing the way it needs to, but it's actually you are changed as a person, because you're not having to work so hard and you're not having to, bite, when we're biting to try to make things work. And we're just trying to, in a lot of ways, trying to keep it from squeaking sometimes, and we don't even realize it because we're fighting air leaks or fighting a key that's loose. It's causing the pad to leak, at certain times. So so I'm 100% with you on that, Brian. And then, but I will say what Melanie was saying about like who you are as a player and your intentions and goals, that's huge as well. Because I mean, a student, they may not be able to buy a new instrument, affordability, thinking of that. But like a professional that can afford it, like, that's another thing that plays into it. I think it's perfectly fine and good that they would want to get a new instrument. But I don't personally buy that they blow out like that quick, unless you're just playing a ton. I mean, and I don't know. In my experience, I've just seen too many clarinets resurrected, you could say, from feeling like they were not working and blown out to now they just played tremendous. And a lot of it is not only that, it's like it's the type of work that goes into it. Like you could have it overhauled and then still think, oh, it's blown out, but it could just be that you had a bad repair job. That's something to consider as well. So there's just so many factors, and I think that's why you can't really just nail down one particular way of thinking on it. And that's why I think there's controversy on that. But yeah, I agree with both of you all on that.
Well, there is, and there's also to add another element to that. Someone mentioned you can just, change mouthpieces and barrels and that will help the situation. And I agree, because, actually yesterday we just sent out a clarinet that we overhauled, the last one we're doing for a while, and it was several decades old. And when I played that thing, man, that thing was really great. And it's probably seen a lot of time. So exactly right. The repair is an important part. But actually, when I started making barrels, the reason I started making barrels is because I did believe my clarinet was blown out. And I didn't want to spend, several grand on a new clarinet. And so that's actually how we developed my very first product, the Focus barrel. And the thing we have to remember is if you think that your clarinet does get blown out, then your barrel gets blown out even before your clarinet gets blown out, because that's the first thing that actually receives the moisture and all of that. So if you do believe in clarinet, blowing out, and you haven't tried another barrel, that's one of the most affordable ways to bring a little bit of life back into your clarinet. And I still have my same R13 that I played on, when I was doing my undergraduate degree. And now I just have a couple of barrels. Of course, I change a barrel every day, but that helps me bring the life back. So I don't recommend trying mouthpieces at first to solve what you think is blowing out, because a barrel will allow you to keep all of the same, for the most part, functions here, whereas a mouthpiece is going to probably involve you changing things to try to accomplish that.
That's a good point about the mouthpiece. To add another element is that exact thing is like, I wish we had a mouthpiece maker on air like Brad Bain or something that could talk to us about some of that. A wizard with mouthpieces. And he, I mean, that's something we're not maybe sometimes thinking about, like, hey, maybe my mouthpiece is warped, or, maybe my reed setup, because my mouthpiece has changed. Maybe that combination between your reed and your mouthpiece is no longer working the way it was, because your facing is twisted slightly or something, So there's all these different things. But I like that, Brian, about the barrels, trying different barrels. That's good, because then you get to see like what that barrel does to change the intonation or what you were perceiving to be blowing out. That's a good point.
I do think that the issue of a clarinet getting blown out is overblown. But I will say that, you know, at the professional level, if you're playing a clarinet over a period of time, changes do occur. The bore changes, usually shrinks a little bit. The inner wall of the bore becomes smoother over time, creating an instrument that's a little bit less resistant. And also, don't forget you're putting a tone through a piece of wood over a period of time. And does that wood itself and the way it does or doesn't vibrate with the tones become a little less resilient? Or I would say yes. And certainly we make barrels. We're well known for barrels. And without question, putting a new barrel on an older instrument can perk it up. And it really doesn't have anything to do with the bore of that particular barrel, but the fact that it's a new piece of wood seems to change things. So I think there are definitely players, certainly at the professional level, that there's an instrument that is starting to lose some of the hold and some of the immediacy that a new instrument would have. And going to mouthpieces, certainly when an instrument starts to get to that place, some people will start looking for a more resistant setup, a different barrel taper, a different mouthpiece setup in order to alleviate that or carry on. So, you know, I think in some cases it is better to move on to a new instrument. Having said that, I mean, Jonathan, who's busy rebuilding older buffets, and I certainly do that myself to a reasonable degree, you know, an older instrument can be made to play very, very well, and if everything else is working, and sometimes an instrument that's a little less resistant is the best thing for a younger player to get started with too. You know, that a pro would be looking for more power in an instrument that a younger player is capable of even dealing with. So these instruments that get passed on from symphony players and so on still have a long, useful life, you know. And you know, I actually recently I overhauled a buffet clarinet that I think was built in about 1940. And it had never been mishandled through its life. It belonged to a saxophone player doubler, so maybe it wasn't played as much as it should have been. But in the end, it was a perfectly fine clarinet. Was it a clarinet that somebody in a principal position in a major orchestra would play? No. But was it a perfectly fine clarinet? Yes. You know.
I think it all goes back to just being really honest about your needs, you know, like John was saying about the power, like, do you need a clarinet that is going to project to the back of a hall that seats thousands and thousands of people or not? You know, that has a lot to do with it. So.
So I have a question for all of you. What was the coolest thing that ever came across your repair bench? Did you ever have an opportunity where someone maybe brought on their instrument and they had a Casper mouthpiece or something really cool like that, or a really interesting clarinet key system, or really just the coolest things you've seen?
I mean, I gotta be honest. There's not that much cool stuff. I mean, they're just clarinets. I mean, you know, I have clarinets that come that are 60, 70, 80 years old. We're talking pre-R13. Some of them have those really cherished mouthpieces. Although just because they say Casper, Shutterville, or whatever doesn't mean they're good. So, I mean, at the end of the day, I'm kind of lame. I just view every clarinet as you know, a clarinet, and then each one has, of course, their individual, you know, tweaks and things. But it is cool, I'll admit, to see clarinets that have some kind of story. So some people will tell me, yeah, my mom bought me this when I was a little girl, and then I passed it down to my daughter, who passed it down to her daughter, and now we're getting it overhauled for the first time in 50 years. You know, those are really cool experiences. So I prefer the stories than the actual items, you know, themselves.
Yeah. Go ahead. No, you first, Melanie.
Yeah, with clarinets, you know, it becomes, you know, just a clarinet is just a clarinet. Any any type of clarinet and any part of the family. But for me, one of the most fun things to work on was actually an original Stowasser, like Taragato, which is, you know, and they're really primitively made compared to the mechanics on any instrument that we have now. But that was kind of cool.
Yeah, I had one clarinet, and it wasn't anything particular about the clarinet, but it was the person talking about the story. So, like the guy's finger, I think it was like a dog accident where like this part of his finger, like from this first knuckle over, was bit off basically. So his index finger on his first hand for, you know, first finger F sharp was short. So he had a repair guy actually take I think it was like a dime, I think, and it was they actually just brazed it on top of that tube and then put a cork pad in there so that it kind of you didn't actually have to worry about closing the hole, that first finger. But there was some more stuff that needed to be done to actually make like thumb F sound like thumb F, because it was super, super flat because it wasn't venting the way it needed to. So, and they actually had a hole already in the dime, but they just put a pad in there. You could tell somebody had been messing with it. So it was kind of neat. I got to work with him. I ended up spent a lot of time working on like a design. So we actually cut that F sharp key in half and added on like basically like an oboe, like just an adjustment screw and a plate, you know, underneath it, and basically made like a split mechanism. It was like an old Selmer clarinet. And so what that did was and I added a spring as well. But what that did was when he played thumb F, it kept the key open the way it needed to, and it vented the way it should, because I reopened the hole in there, so he just had one small little hole he had to push, and it drastically changed. I mean, just to see his face change, like, you know, when he played it, it's like, hey, that feels like my clarinet again. That's why I do repair. It's to see, you know, even students as well, like when they get their instrument back and it's like, I thought it was me, and it was, you know, the instrument that was holding them back. To me, that's more powerful than just, you know, maybe seeing stuff. But I guess I've seen a few cool like mouthpieces and things that I don't get to play them though, because they belong to other people. But
I still play them anyway. I don't care. I don't tell them.
Good to know.
Yeah.
I guess for me, is I do build custom key work for people, and people ask me to, you know, maybe do a covered right hand, or they have an arthritic problem, or do something. And I've done, you know, many modifications over the years, and I enjoy that. I enjoy custom building something, and I enjoy the challenge of putting that together. You know, what interests me is if I see a clarinet is if it's been modified or some way, or just a very good setup by one of the leading people in the field. I'll look at it very closely and see, you know, what they've done, how their approach is, how I differ or concur with their approach, and just kind of analyze it from that perspective. That's what I continue to find exciting and you know, interesting. And also, I guess I've been in this field long enough that I can identify people's work who work at a high level. You know, I know what the Brannon's work looks like. I know what Tim Clark's work looks like. I know what Mark Jacoby's work looks like. I know Melanie and I know each other well, so I know what her work looks like, and she comes from a great lineage too. So I don't know Brian or Jonathan's work. I haven't knowingly seen it, but what truly interests me is what has been done and how it has been done, and the level of artistry from the bench really is what I live for, you know. So
I'm just going to give John a shout out, because my wife actually bought clarinets from John, and the work I learned a lot from actually playing on my wife's clarinet when we first met, because
the truth comes out, you see.
Well, it's truth. Yeah, I'm an honest guy. You know, but he did work on these horns that she bought, and I'm not kidding. My wife plays clarinet more than anybody I know. She practices a lot, and years and years and years later, John's work held, I mean, I'm not kidding, like the long B didn't even go, it was intense, right? And so I actually used that. I looked at John's work and tried to figure out what he did to really make that work, and adapted my material use. And so what's really cool for me is that even though I don't do nearly as much male repair, and I'm kind of getting out of that, is to see how much I've learned from watching other people. And I think that's just the coolest thing and a cool experience about repair.
Thank you. I appreciate that. You have a lovely wife.
She is quite lovely, yeah.
She's a very quiet gal until she gets a clarinet into her hands, and then away she goes.
So I'm seeing a question about logo restoration. Any advice on that? Let's say it's rubbed off. In this particular case, it looks like this person has sanitized the clarinet with alcohol, rubbing alcohol because of coronavirus. Is there any way to restore the shine, or just in general for general logo restoration?
A repair person can do that for you.
Yep.
They can restore the shine of the whole instrument and everything.
The logos are a little harder. The older logos on certain brands were engraved differently versus just being stamped. I will say one of the things that I do, so I have a Tosca-based clarinet that I bought a couple of years ago after they changed the logo to be sort of the stamped one. It will come off very easily. And so what I do is I actually just put like auto protection film right over the logo. And my Tosca looks like it was brand new. I picked it up straight from Jacksonville. So for those of you, it doesn't really help this person, because if it was a newer clarinet, restoring the logo is a little trickier. But if you buy a new clarinet, specifically, let's say it's a buffet and that logo wears off and you're worried about that, it's just cosmetic. But if you want to keep it there, I actually put a little bit of protection tape. It's the same material I use to make my own mouthpiece patches. And my logo looks like it's been brand new for years.
That's really good to know. I think for a final question is just any advice you have for what teachers and like high school students, and I don't like to say the average clarinetist, but someone that is not looking to be a repair person, what tools they would need in their toolkit and what basic repairs they should know.
I usually recommend that everybody have some Teflon tape, also called plumber's tape. And usually like I use like small hair ties like you would use for your hair. And basically with those two things, you can fix almost anything that goes wrong on your instrument. If a spring breaks, that's where you would use the hair tie. I don't recommend rubber bands because they can have a reaction with if you have silver keys, but that will work too. And then with the Teflon tape, you can put a pad back in that fell out. You can wrap your tenon cork that fell off or got rocky. You can, even do a bumper cork if you absolutely need to. You can do really almost anything with just those things, and a screwdriver.
Yeah, I have a sort of a funny story. So I have a sheet, when I'm doing this repair talk, at different events, and so I have a list at the end that I go through what you need. I'm going to add the hair tie thing, so I put Q-tips, Q-tips, lemon juice, cigarette paper, paper towels, all that stuff. And then Teflon tape. And then I had, the funny part is I put sugar-free chewing gum. And so chewing gum can be used, if you had to, you could use a little bit to get you through an emergency until, if you're about to perform or something, to get a pad, stuck back in. But the funny part was the sugar-free part. I don't know why free on my paper, but yeah, I guess it's healthier. But yeah, any chewing gum would work. But really, I mean, all joking aside, like Q-tips, just to get in there and kind of clean out your tone holes. Maybe a small screwdriver, maybe not, depending on you as a person, like how you feel comfortable using that. Like if you don't feel comfortable, tightening up something and you're afraid you're going to scratch it or something like that. And then, yeah, I mean, other than that, I would just say using like a synthetic type cork grease without petroleum. That I know we didn't talk about that with corks, but that petroleum-based product can actually release the glue and cause your corks to fall off. And then the paper towels are for actually, I always recommend wiping your corks off gently to get all the dirty and abrasiveness off of there before you add the cork grease to it. So those are just some general things that are going to prolong the life of your corks, because especially if, you know, leaving them together like Brian had mentioned earlier, that can compress it, but also the dirt buildup. If you just keep adding cork grease, you know, then it comes to the shop and then, you know, one of us, you know, cleans it. A lot of times your cork is loose after we clean it just because the dirt, we've removed the dirt from it. So yeah, I mean, other than that, that's really, and one last thing to mention is pliers. You know, unless you have smooth job parallel pliers, I would recommend not using pliers. Leave that for repair techs. You know, because I've just seen too many clarinets where it's like, you know, my dad or the band director, and they just have regular old, you know, pliers with jaws, and it ruins keys. It really does. And so yeah, and just a lot of this stuff is just common sense when it comes to maintenance type things, you know, for the clarinetist. You know, it's just, do I feel comfortable doing what I'm about to do? Like just going through some of those thought processes. I think that's helpful as well.
Jonathan said what I was going to say about pliers, is that all of us on the repair bench have seen clarinets that have been mutilated by pliers and the marks they leave on clarinets, and any respectable repair person will have some proper high-grade pliers without indents, smooth on the inside so it doesn't damage the key in the instances they do need to use the pliers. So I think just beware of how you approach your instrument and what's going to be the consequence long-term, really.
Yeah, I agree with all the tool recommendations. I would include a spring hook if no one mentioned that for sure.
Yes, spring hook, yeah.
Because that's crucial. When we talk about a lot of problems that happen on clarinets, sometimes it's just simply a spring has come undone, and that's such an easy fix. In terms of like basic repairs, Ginny, that you mentioned, I think there are two of the most common repairs that we do are going to be, you know, sealing the long tube stuff, right? So talking about, you know, low E and B, that kind of thing, making sure that that's sealed. And then the other one is the bridge adjustment. And a lot of people don't even know that this is out. You know, if maybe you're someone who doesn't use the 1-in-1 fingering, or you don't use alternate altissimo fingerings, and for some reason you don't know that your 1-in-1 is out. But I think every clarinet player, every serious clarinet player should at least be able to identify when your bridge adjustment is out. And they should also be able to at least identify when, you know, there's a leak, because while being able to do those repairs is really valuable, I think identifying them is going to be even more valuable in the long run.
To add to what Brian just said, you know, and the flip side, and this is I actually see almost more often than the 1-in-1 not working, is that the bridge is what we would call over-adjusted. And so actually what happens then is that your very first finger on your lower joint is leaking instead of your 1-in-1 not working, because those two things are connected. And people tell me like, oh, this first pad, it's leaking. And it's actually just your bridges is unadjusted. And then your entire right hand is stuffy and horrible, you know, and maybe won't even play depending on how bad it is, just because of that. So.
And this may seem basic, but also like, I don't know how many times I'll send a clarinet off and then it's like, you know, the whole lower half of my clarinet's not working. And I'm like, well, check your bridge, like make sure you aligned it properly. So I always, you know, tell them to sight down the post, because I always sight the post, you know, and when I'm, you know, doing that adjustment. But then, you know, and then also checking the lines on a buffet, like they actually have lines where you can, you know, actually line that up. I'm waiting for somebody to design something where it goes together and it's the same spot every single time. That would eliminate a lot.
Like
maybe one of you all can do that.
Yeah. I've actually seen that mechanism on lower clarinets as well, and I've also seen people modify it where they actually they not only do they, you know, they can make a mark where you know exactly where it goes, but they also add in hardware for it to stop. I've been a little concerned about that, just because if you know you make some changes to the instrument, there are some other things to consider. But that's a great idea. However, I also find it valuable to actually teach people about purposely misaligning your clarinet. In fact, I'll have customers come in who ask me to actually realign the bridge so that their fingers line up as opposed to the clarinet. And it can be done. I mean, you know, if you're a repair person and you're willing to work with people, that's what you do. That's what makes us happy. So not all the time is lining up actually lined up. And that's really important to recognize.
It's also probably important noting that, because Jonathan mentioned a thing about, you know, buffet has that line that everyone can line up with, but actually people see that line very differently. And it may be just like a millimeter, but depending on where you end up lining it up, it's going to be whether that bridge is now aligned or not. And so, you know, sometimes if you got something back in the mail, it pays to just, you know, try to turn it a little bit one way or the other and see if it works now, because it's possible that you're a repair person and you are just actually lining it up completely differently because you just see it differently.
Good point.
Okay, well, I want to thank all of the panelists for a really interesting, informative panel on everything that I was wondering about clarinet repairs, at least. So everyone give a round of applause for these amazing panelists. Like I said, I'm going to be collecting all the information that was mentioned. I have a little list right here, so you should be seeing that sometime next week. If anyone, whether you're a panelist or you attended this and you think there's something that should be included, please email me, send me a message on any of the ICA social media. My email is assistant@clarinet.org. But I just wanted to thank everyone again for this. As a reminder, this isn't the last event. We have a fun weekend planned for a lot of really cool webinars. Just as a review, tomorrow, I'm going to list all the times in Eastern time. Tomorrow at 10 a.m. is a panel entirely in Spanish. So if you want to go to that one should be really informative. 12 o'clock tomorrow at noon is auxiliary clarinets. 2 p.m. is finding your inner voice. 5 p.m. is a game show trivia contest hosted by yours truly and Jessica as well, along with some other people. Weekend warm-up is Sunday at 10 a.m. Eastern time. Noon on Sunday is clarinet continuations, adult enthusiasts, and new horizons. 2 p.m. on Sunday, clarinet and COVID, teaching in the time of COVID-19, where we'll also be discussing health and wellness in the arts during the time of COVID-19. And then the final event on Sunday is creating clarinet content online. That will be at 5 p.m. All of this is on our website. So if you go to clarinet.org and look at ICA Plays On 2020, you'll be able to find the schedule, the Zoom registration links, the panelists, everything that you wanted to know. If there's a question that you have, feel free to email me or Jessica, message us on social media. That's totally fine. But I really want to thank everyone again for coming to this. This has been a wonderful first day for our first virtual event for the ICA. And that's all I have. Any final words from anyone else?
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having me. Yeah.
Thank you all.
I appreciate being